Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher, and on today's Synth Clips we're going to talk about harmonics, and specifically how they relate to resonant filters. And I know I normally say no math, no graphs in these videos. We're going to have to do just a little bit to get a basic understanding, and then we're going to move past that and go back to your ear. And that is this. I tell my college students when I talk about harmonics to write down this sentence, and that is, a harmonic is a whole number multiple of the fundamental frequency. What do I mean by that? Well, whole number, 1, 6, 8, 24, 36, whole number, multiplied against the fundamental frequency, the frequency that when a trumpet plays or a violin plays, the note you think of, that's the lowest harmonic, that's the fundamental frequency. And most people think of the first harmonic is the next harmonic up from the fundamental frequency, and that's wrong. The first harmonic is the fundamental frequency. It makes the math stupid easy. For example, if I took a tuning fork at 440A and hit it, and I'm hearing 440, that is the first harmonic. You simply take 1 and multiply it against 440, so the first harmonic is 440. The second harmonic would be 2 times 440, which is 880, and so on and so on. So if you had 100 hertz, and the fifth harmonic is 500 hertz. That's all the math we're going to do today. But at least you understand that it's a whole number multiplied against the fundamental frequency. And as human beings, we really like whole numbers multiplied against the fundamental frequency. We like harmonics. An example of this is when we find instruments from thousands and thousands of years ago on different continents that didn't connect. We find that when each continent made a flute-type instruments, the holes were similarly placed, the diameters were similar. Many of the aspects of the instrument are similar. Why? Because even if they didn't know it, every time they tried to improve their instrument, what they were really doing was getting more harmonics and fewer non-harmonics. Definition of non-harmonic is a non-whole number multiplied against the fundamental frequency. 1/4, 0.8, pi, whatever. And it turns out that for percussion instruments, we like non-harmonics. So that's the sound you hear in drums and cymbals and other non-pitched things. But instruments that we think are beautiful musical instruments, it's because they have lots of harmonics and fewer non-harmonics. An example of one that has a blend of both would be like a steel drum. It's what makes a steel drum sound exotic. It has a lot of harmonics, but the nature of it being hammered out of a drum, there are just going to be some non-harmonics, and that's why there's kind of an alien quality to steel drum. So it's important to kind of understand this. Each harmonic is a multiple, whole number multiple to the next. But now that you understand that, for the rest of the video, I just want you to hear the notes and kind of internalize them. It helps to know the numbers if you want to say to somebody else, yeah, I'm bringing the filter up and I'm stopping at the fifth harmonic or something like that. But other than that, the math isn't really necessary. And to do the first demonstration, I'm using the Typhon analog synthesizer by Dreadbox. I really like this box. I keep finding more ways to use this thing. It has so many wonderful synthesis techniques in a single little box. It's true analog. It has 2 analog oscillators, an analog 24 dB per octave filter. It has an analog amp, but then goes into stereo digital effects by Sine Vibes, and I really like the effects, and it is one of my favorite combinations of doing analog synthesis into a really good digital effects unit. And it has ping pong, which is perfect for this demonstration. So that's why I'm starting with this one. And so I'm going to start with just a very basic what I'm going to call an init, except instead of 2 oscillators, I'm going to make sure I'm down to 1. So I have 2 sawtooths right now. And now I'm down to 1 sawtooth because I don't want to get confused with harmonics and beating and stuff like that. I just want 1 sawtooth oscillator. And now I'm going to take this filter, which is as I had said, a 24 dB per octave, which means that every octave above the cutoff frequency, it gets 24 dB quieter. And that's also known as a 4-pole low-pass filter. And it's a low-pass filter because it's always passing the lows, but as I turn it down, it's reducing the highs. So I'm going to hit a note and just start lowering the filter. Now, I'm really rolling off each of those harmonics, but you're not hearing them as individual things. And And the only time that you'll really hear that is I turn up resonance. And I better explain that really quickly. Resonance is when you take the output of a filter and feed some of it back into the input. You can't feed it all, or the filter turns into a very loud sine wave oscillator all by itself. But you can put most of it back in. And what it does is it takes that little peak that happens right before the cutoff starts going down. It actually goes up a little bit. And when you feed it back into itself, it makes that hump greater, which means we're going to hear the harmonics as I sweep. And so, once again, sweeping without resonance. And I could turn that cutoff far enough down so that it's lower than the fundamental frequency, which means you can't hear it. And so now I'm going to turn up the resonance. And I'm going to call out the numbers of harmonics as we go past each. So there's my fundamental. The next one will be the second harmonic 2 times, which is going to be an octave. There's the octave. The next one will be 3 times, which is an octave and a fifth. There it is. The next one will be 4 times, which is 2 octaves. Now it's times 5, which is 2 octaves and a third. And now a fifth. And now a flattened 7, it's a new one. And now back to the octave. Now a 9, which is like a 2, but up a couple octaves. Another third. Next one's weird. It's a sharp 11. It's like a sharp 4, but up an octave or more. There it is. Now another fifth. Now a 6th, but really because it's up a bunch of octaves, it's a 13th. And now the flat 7 again. And now they're getting harder and harder to hear. And then one more octave. And after that, they start running together in a non-Western scale. And it gets a little woofy down there because we're really boosting that fundamental frequency. So you just kind of get used to that scale and where on any particular programming thing you're doing, where you want that sweep to be. But at least as you start giving it a number, you can say, yeah, I want to sweep between the second harmonic and the fifth harmonic. And it's just an easier way to remember it. You know, it's not a lot of math. I particularly like analog filters that do what we're hearing here, where you're only hearing the bump of each of the harmonics. And one of the downsides of that type of filter is quite often you lose bass with a lot of resonance, which, you know, people act like that's a bad thing. You're basically saying be peaky, but move away from the bass. So you're going to emphasize other frequencies a lot louder than the bass, making the bass seem softer. There are other filters out there that keep the bass, but one of the things that I'm not as crazy about is you don't hear the bumps as you go past the harmonics. It starts becoming, the resonant note starts becoming this note that just purely sweeps through the whole range as opposed to hitting those harmonics. Why do I like that so much? Because I love the sound of those bumps being hit as you sweep when you're going into a delay, in particular a ping pong delay. This has a beautiful ping pong delay. What does that mean? It means you hit your dry signal, then left and right, then left and right, and left and right, and left and right. And it creates a beautiful stereo image, and it sounds great when you're sweeping through harmonics like this. So I'm going to turn the ping pong up. You can hear the left and right. And now listen to the sweep. I'm going to turn that mix up even more. And now I'm going to turn the resonance up to make those bumps even more obvious. It's just a beautiful sound. So I'm going to try it on some other synthesizers. And I should point out to those who are into music theory and jazz that that harmonic series where I've got the fundamental, the root, then an octave and a fifth, then another octave, then a major third, then a fifth, then a flat 7 and a 9 and a sharp 11 and a 13. That is a jazz 13 sharp 11 chord, a very popular chord. And so in many ways, the harmonic series dictates what we think of as musical notes. So one of the things that you can do with these harmonics is modulate them via an envelope or an LFO or something else. I'm going to use an LFO set to sample and hold, or random. So I'm going to randomly be hitting these harmonics. I've set sample and hold up here. My destination is filter cutoff, and I have the rate of the LFO locked to the rate of the delay, but I can do any unit of the beat against the other, so I can create all kind of polyrhythms. And I'm simply going to slowly turn up the level or the depth of how much the randomness is getting to that filter cutoff. So it didn't take any understanding of the math to do that, but it does come in handy when you're doing envelopes. I'm going to use a different keyboard to show you that. Okay, so now I have the Moog Subsequent 37 analog synthesizer. And the reason I'm going to use this is, one, it has the famous 4-pole ladder filter that I just love to death, but also because the Subsequent 37 allows you to have a 6 dB 12 dB, 18 dB, or 24 dB per octave slope. So I'm going to let you hear sweeping the resonant filter with the different slopes. And so I'm starting with an init, like I always do, which is just a single sawtooth wave. And now I have it set to 1 pole, or 6 dB per octave, which is a much more gentle slope, and I'm going to roll that down with no resonance. And then just so you can see what a 12 dB per octave sounds like. And 18 dB per octave. And 24 dB per octave. And again, all these are without resonance. So now I'm going to leave it on the 4-pole 24 dB per octave setting, low pass. And one more time without resonance. And now I'm going to bring the resonance up quite a bit. And notice on the Moog how it really peaks at each of the harmonics, like you hear them as musical notes. It's the thing I love about Moog filters. And now I'll back it down. So here's the same thing with a 3-pole filter. Two-pole. Notice the harmonics stick out even more on that one. Now I'm going to go to the 6 dB per octave, or 1-pole low pass. very distinct harmonics. And one of the things the Moog filter does really well is do that same trick, but with very low frequencies where it just clicks. So I'm going to go down a couple octaves, do the same thing. But again, even though I'm doing it fast now, we're really just still running through that whole series. So now I'm going to turn the delay off. And I've shown you what it sounds like if you modulate that filter with sample and hold to get the different harmonics. But now I'm going to use an envelope. So I'm going to set my filter envelope up here. And as I've talked about in other episodes, you always want to know whether the thing that's modulating something is bipolar. In other words, it goes above zero and below zero to negative, or does it only go positive? Well, in this case, the amp goes positive, which tells me that I first want to set the filter at the lowest point I want it to go to. And this is where knowing the harmonic numbers really helps, because you want to decide when the envelope's all done, what harmonic do I want to fall to? Now, if you want that to work for all keys, you have to turn your keyboard track to 1-to-1. So in other words, as I keep going higher with the keys, the filter is compensating and moving so that all the tricks I create on the filter stay the same no matter what note I'm playing. So I have the EG amount set to 0, and the key tracking at 1-to-1. So now, because the envelope is not going to this, I can set what I want the lowest frequency of the filter to be when the envelope's finished. And right there is the fundamental or first harmonic. That's probably too dark to end up on, no one will hear it. I usually like to start at the next harmonic, which is the second harmonic or the octave. That might be a good place to land. So now that I know that I have my minimum correctly set, I can turn the sustain of my filter envelope all the way up, make everything else very quick. And now, by turning up the EG amount, I'm going to set what the highest harmonic I'm going to get to. So now I have some number of octaves up. And I know now that if I turn my sustain all the way to 0 and then give a slower attack and decay, that I'm going to start from that second harmonic, go all the way up to one of the octaves and come back. And I just know it's going to work because I've set my min, I've set my max. A little fast, we'll slow it down. It just works out perfectly. And again, through the delay, very pretty. We'll try a different delay time, a little faster maybe, and maybe some more feedback and a little more mix and a different note. But it landed exactly on the second harmonic, and it went all the way up to that octave harmonic that I wanted. And it works on all keys because the keyboard tracking is 1-to-1. So now I have the ASM Hydrasynth. This is a digital synth, but I particularly like the filters on this. I think they really did a great job with simulating analog filters, and in particular simulating the Moog 4-pole ladder filter. So of course, I built that little tricky ping pong sound with Resonant Filter that I do on pretty much everything I get my hands on. But in this case, I got to use the ribbon, which is really cool. Nothing else is different other than instead of turning the cutoff by hand, I turn it by ribbon, but really it's exactly the same thing. It's just a lot more fun to do and a lot more visual. And now the last thing I want to do is, because this is a polyphonic synth, I'm going to change it from monophony to polyphony. I couldn't do that on the other two synths, so I just changed it to poly, and now I can do chords and listen to some of the interesting things you can do as I'm sweeping through the harmonics. And they're going to stay correct because I have the key tracking at 1-to-1, so each of those notes will go through their harmonic series the same as all the other notes. And I'll use the shift sustain in order to hold the note, so I have free hands here, and I'll just play a little chord. So hopefully that'll give you some understanding of harmonics, a simple way of thinking about them, and a way that you can use them when you're programming to decide where you want to start and end on which harmonics. If you have any further ideas for synth clip topics, just put them in the notes below. You can also get to a playlist in the info section. If you have any further questions about the Typhon, the subsequent 37, or the ASM Hydrasynth, please contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching.